Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to be with you tonight. My name is Nadia Daqqa, and I'm Palestinian, but at the same time a citizen of Israel. For those who may not know, when Israel was established, a group of Palestinian remains on their land. So I'm part of this group, and people often refer to us as the Palestinian of 48. I studied at Tel Aviv University and became a member of the Israeli Bar Association. So by definition, I am an Israeli lawyer. I initially worked in civil law, and at the same time, I began to develop an interest in human rights. This path led me to work at a human rights organization called Hamoked, Center for the Defense of the Individual, an Israeli NGOs. And in my work there, I focused on the rights of detainees within the context of occupation. In most cases, these were Palestinian detainees classified as security prisoners. I also worked in a very specific field that originated in British law and was adopted by the occupying authorities, the punitive house demolitions. And working in these areas has never been easy. We don't use to win our cases. It is extremely challenging, and it comes with the deep personal difficulties because you are constantly witnessing a severe violation of the most basic human rights, including policies of collective punishment. At the same time, it feels somehow strange for me to speak about myself as someone who is being targeted because of her work, when my daily work is focused on speaking about the people I represent and the grave violation of their rights. But when I reflect on it, especially after the past 2 years of what I describe as a genocidal war, it has truly becoming an inherent part of the Israeli policy against Palestinians. And lawyers are being targeted as part of a broader strategy and as a tool of repression against the communities they represent, and in this case, the Palestinian that they represent. And before I proceed, I want, and it is important for me to note that I'm speaking from a very sensitive position. And my participation in this panel, which is professional and important and entirely legitimate, must be done with great caution. This is due both to the well-known persecution of lawyers working in this field and to my own identity. For example, statements that may sound completely reasonable and widely accepted in an international context can provoke hostility in the Israeli context and may place the person who voices them at risk. And one example is the fact that we are talking about an occupying entity, and under international law, there is a recognition that unoccupied people has the right to resist this occupation. In the Palestinian case, this is not a temporary occupation, but rather a process of settlement and colonization. From this point alone, any act by a Palestinian to resist occupation is treated as a criminal act and addressed through a legal system similar to the ordinary criminal law. So since I began working in this field, I have represented Palestinian detainees, specifically regarding their conditions of detention, like in family visits, medical care, and basic rights such as access to books or appropriate equipment. I do not use to represent them in their criminal proceedings or in relation to the acts that lead to their imprisonment, but only regarding their treatment after entering the prison. And the persecution I experienced did not initially stem from this work, rather from my involvement in cases of punitive home demolitions. This is one of the most controversial issues in the Israeli legal system. For those unfamiliar with the policy, we are talking about an essentially form of collective punishment. an individual commits an act, is arrested or killed, and then the authorities come to their family and demolish their home. And this policy has gained public support within Israeli society. And in some cases, even the courts have expressed concern that it is being used to satisfy the public opinion. And in this context, I found myself being harassed by extremist groups who attend every hearing on this issue. They disrupt proceedings, demand that families of Israeli victims be allowed to speak, although they are not part of the procedure, and humiliate me as I enter and leave the courthouse. They shout accusations that I receive foreign funding to represent what they call, what they used to call terrorists, and they constantly emphasize my family connection to the prisoner Nadia Daqqa, who died in prison about 2 years ago, and now saying all the time that he rotted in jail. The harassment includes live filming, following me to the courthouse parking lot, and portraying me as a terrorist by myself. They approach me physically, and in some cases use sexually suggestive language. I should also note that in some of these cases, I used to learn about the demolition order through the media before the army even sent the order to me, although I was part of the procedure. And this clearly showed that the legal process is very symbolic, and the main goal is to demonstrate to the Israeli public how they can punish Palestinians, even though in most cases the family affected have no connection to the alleged acts related to their family member. Since this policy reflects mainstream Israeli society so closely, the courts are not eager to intervene in these cases. In some cases, judges who have expressed opposition to the policy have themselves been threatened. My requests to the court system for basic protection, such as preventing these groups from attending hearings or keeping them away from me inside the courtroom, or providing safe space where I could wait for hearings away from them and their cameras, were simply ignored. And I also know lawyers who, because of this persecution, choose to stop representing cases of this kind. And this, I think, in my opinion, is absolutely understandable. I continue to do this work and have no intention to stop, but I must say that the sense of threat has intensified over the past 2 years. When I leave the courthouse, I enter a public space, and as is well known, much of the population in Israel is armed. Accusations linking me to terrorism can easily put my life in risk. What makes this even harder is that attempts to file police complaints for harassment were not addressed at all. And this means that I and other lawyers like me are left without protection. Over the past 2 years, the overall treatment of lawyers has significantly worsened. Human rights organizations working in these areas have faced campaigns aimed at cutting off their fundings, an accusation that is commonly raised in similar contexts. It is important also to understand that this situation is an inherent part of the populism that increased and has penetrated Israel's bureaucratic and judicial systems, and in fact is the real side of the policy. Alongside the genocidal war outside, we have witnessed a parallel war taking place inside prison walls, far from media cameras. From the beginning, when we tried to meet Palestinian detainees, visits were delayed and scheduled far into the future. Even when we arrived, visits were denied under the claim that a state of emergency had been declared inside the prison. Later, visits were partially allowed, but every lawyer entering prison experienced a dramatic change in the behavior of the officers working there. and we were treated as suspects by ourselves. The treatment was harsh and humiliating. Searches were extremely invasive. In some prison, I was required to undress in front of a female guard to prove I was not hiding prohibited items in my bra. Our documents were inspected in ways that violated attorney-client privilege. There was no way to object because the visit itself was conditional on these searches. Later, the authorities began prohibiting documents written in Arabic, prohibit from entering the visit room, documents written in Arabic, the language of the people we represent and the language we use to communicate with them. Many lawyers were denied entry to prison or summoned for interrogation on suspicions of passing forbidden messages to the prisoners, simply because a piece of paper contained greetings from a prisoner's mother or the names of his children and some facts about them was found between these papers. And for such basic things, lawyers faced bans from entering prisons and even disciplinary or ethical proceedings that endangered their licenses and their work. Last August, similar measures were taken against me, despite there was no specific incident. One day, while I was in the middle of handling numerous petitions regarding prison conditions, I received a letter stating that I was suspected of passing messages between prisoners and that the head of the prison services intended to ban me from entering prisons for 6 months. I filed an objection, and 3 days later, I was informed that the ban was in effect. While the matter was still supposedly internal, a media article was published stating that I had been banned due to serious suspicions of passing messages, emphasizing that I was an Arab lawyer and a relative of Walid Daqqa. My work on the cases I worked on was frozen, and this had a severe impact on my ability to continue working, including a psychological, on a psychological level. About 2 months later, I finally reached the court hearing. The decision to ban me was based on secret evidences, exactly in a similar way to the administrative detention procedure. The judge indicated that the information did not seem strong enough, but was unwilling to issue a clear ruling stating that the IPS was wrong. Instead, the judge suggested reaching an agreement, and at the end of the day, we agreed to a 4 months in total of a ban, and with a commitment not to renew the ban. I had no real choice at that time, and any other legal route could have dragged on far longer, so I decided to accept it. And during this process, I just remember that in one of the recent hearings on house demolition, the group harassing me mentioned the number of petitions I had filed during the war regarding the detention condition of the so-called terrorists. I cannot be sure 100%, but I feel that the ban was connected to monitoring the volume of petition I had submitted at that time. The whole situation is grim, and it is extremely sensitive for anyone working in this field. But for those committed to human rights, especially in this period, giving up was never a privilege we had. We have witnessed another aspect of genocide inside prison walls, and at the level of the explicit policy, one that has even received backing from the court itself. And a very good example that I like to use is the case of the Gazawi detainees. Since 2023, thousands, for who don't know, thousands of detainees from Gaza Strip have been held in custody. And at the beginning, they were held in conditions of absolute enforced disappearance. And unfortunately, this occurred with the passive acceptance of the Israeli court. After extensive legal proceedings, lawyers' visits were eventually permitted. Beyond the professional and legal aspects of our visit to these detainees, especially, another crucial element emerged, the human element, the human one. At the end of the day, yes, we are lawyers, but first of all, we are human beings. And when you meet a person who left their entire family behind in the hell of war, that visit allows them to understand that their family is alive and has reached out to a lawyer in order to visit them. That alone caused many detainees to break down in tears because it was the first sign of life they had received from their families. And when the goal of the system is to isolate detainees completely and to operate in a manner that violates the minimal standards of detention as defined under international law, it becomes very easy to understand why the system placed obstacles in the way of lawyers accessing prisons. And indeed, they succeeded in delaying our work. It is no coincidence that around 50 lawyers were prevented during this specific period from entering prisons for extended lengths of time, a fact that itself demonstrates that the importance of these visits and their critical role in exposing and challenging detention conditions.